continue on in our series in 1 Samuel, and this morning we're going to be in chapter 11. I wanted to give you a quick review of where we've been. Samuel's chapter 1 through 3, we have this nativity of Samuel. We have his dedication to Eli, or to the temple in which Eli was. Samuel was raised to the station of prophet, and then appointed as a judge. Samuel was the last judge over Israel. Chapters 4 to 7, sometimes you'll hear that called the Ark narrative. There was this utter lack of leadership in Israel. The people started to use the Ark as this totem that they could get whatever they wanted out of it. They started treating God like a vending machine. And it ends with, called the Ark narrative because sometimes the Ark, we remember, just kind of went off on its own. And it ends with Samuel kind of reestablishing his leadership as prophet, priest, and judge, but yet no king. In chapter 8, Israel has rejected God entirely, and rather being the example from which other countries can draw, Israel has said, we want a king because we want to be like everybody else. In chapter 9, Saul is appointed to be king. In chapter 10, Saul is publicly chosen by Lot whenever the tribes come together. And now we come to chapter 11. Saul's been publicly chosen, but he's kind of just standing by. But Saul's not in a vacuum, and neither is Israel. The enemies of God are all around. And so here we are. Before we come to God's word, let's go to him in prayer and ask for help. Father God, we do not dare enter into your presence without repentance. We do not dare approach your word without prayer. We would ask that you would illuminate this word, that we may see what it is you have for us here, that you would soften our heart, that it may be applied and continue to change us more into the image of your Son. We ask the words of my mouth and meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. Amen. So now we come to 1 Samuel 11. Hear now the word of the Lord. Then Nahash, the Ammonite, went up and besieged Jabesh-Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, make a treaty with us, and we will serve you. But Nahash the Ammonite said to them, on this occasion I'll make a treaty with you, that I gouge out all your right eyes, and thus bring disgrace on all Israel. And the elders of Jabesh said to him, give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers throughout all the territory of Israel. Then, if there's no one to save us, we will give ourselves up to you. When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, they reported the matter in the ears of the people, and all the people wept aloud. Now behold, Saul was coming from the field behind the oxen. And Saul said, what is wrong with the people that they're weeping? So they told him the news of the men of Jabesh. And the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled. He took a yoke of ox, cut them into pieces, sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hand of the messengers, saying, whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen. Then the dread of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out as one man. When they mustered them at Bezek, the people of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. And they said to the messengers who had come, thus shall you say to the men of Jabesh-Gilead, tomorrow by the time the sun is hot, you shall have salvation. And when the messengers came and told the men of Jabesh, they, the men of Jabesh, would have told the Amorites. Therefore, the men of Jabesh said, tomorrow we will give ourselves to you, and you may do to us whatever seems good to you. And the next day, Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp in the morning watch, struck down the Ammonites until the heat of the day, and those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. Then the people said to Samuel, who is it that said, shall Saul reign over us? Bring Bring the men, that they may be put to death. But Saul said, not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel. Then Samuel said to the people, come, let us go to Gilgal, and there renew the kingdom. So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they sacrificed peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. May God bless the hearing and the reading of his holy, inspired, and inerrant word. This is not a troubling, but on the offset, a little bit of a confusing story, even though the story is very clear. This is a story where clearly Saul is a hero. He's a hero in every way that the people want and that the people need, and especially the way that the people expect. Normally we think of Saul and we think that he's a foil or a comparison to David that we talked about earlier. David was better, therefore David's good. Saul was worse, therefore Saul's bad. So why are all these wonderful, wonderful things happening to Saul? Saul is a bad guy, so why does God let good things happen to him? I've kind of tentatively titled this, Why Does God Let Good Things Happen to Bad People? Normally we ask the other question, why does God let bad things happen to good people? And that's an important question, one we've probably all asked. And the answer to that question, why does God let bad things happen to good people, there can be many answers to that because the Bible gives many answers to that. Perhaps, and this takes prayer and a lot of discerning to know those answers with confidence, but there are instances where seemingly bad things can happen as a result of sin. Seemingly bad things can happen because they're not really bad, but we just don't understand them. But there's lots of answers to that important question in the Bible. But I'm turning this question so we can understand how what we're going to see in this narrative. A good thing happens to Saul, a good thing happens to Saul, a good thing happens to Israel. Saul's making all the right moves. But Saul's a bad guy. So how do we reconcile this? Why does God let good things happen to bad people? Well, the answer to both of those questions comes together and is rooted in God's glory. I mentioned before that the Westminster Catechism is this great kind of outline for teaching the fundamentals of the faith. And I want you to see how quickly the the catechism, comes to that notion of God's glory. We're going over the children's catechism with our girls, and the question one is, who made you? God. What else did God make? God made all things. Number 3, why did God make you in all things? For his own glory. In the children's catechism, it takes 3 questions to get there because it's like this gentle liftoff. But the first question in the shorter catechism, what is man's chief end, or what is man's primary purpose? The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. And enjoy him forever is important because the Christian life should be a life of great joy. And God can make us content and joyful even in all circumstances. That's what the whole book of Philippians is about. And so the joy is important, but see how it's simply second. The priorities of those divines that wrote the confession was outstanding. They got the glory of God first, and that's right, and our enjoyment of him is included, and that is right and proper, but the glory of God is first and foremost. It is an ultimate answer. So the ultimate answer addresses both why does God let bad things happen to good people? It's ultimately for his glory. But it also addresses why does God let good things happen to bad people? Ultimately, it's for his glory. And we're going to be looking at that here. I suppose one other note. That question that we normally ask, why does God let bad things happen to good people? It may misunderstand, we call it biblical anthropology, the understanding of the nature of man from a biblical perspective. I think the cold shower of Reformed theology is understanding that good people, there really are no good people. Way down deep, where we are at our best, we are terrible people. Now that would be unregenerate. That would be unrepentant people left to themselves. Their human nature is not that of a good person. Romans 3:10, no one is righteous, no, not 1. Romans 3:23. All have sinned, all fall short of the glory of God. And I'm partial, if you wanted a proof text, to Jeremiah 17:9. It says, the heart of men are, I think it's wicked and incredibly deceitful, or sometimes it says incredibly sick. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. The King James says desperately wicked. That is who we are on our own. We are desperately wicked, desperately sick people. And so the question is not, why does God let good things happen to bad people, or why does God let bad things happen to good people? It's, why does good happen at all? If we are bad people, why does God let anything good happen at all? And it is ultimately for his own glory, to show his love and to show his mercy and to show his kindness. So we're going to look at this text this morning, and we're going to see how gracious God is, through whom he works, and what we're supposed to do about it. So this narrative, this is a complete narrative. It's an entire chapter of the Old Testament. It's only 15 verses. In 15 verses, we have all these parts. In verses 1 through 3, this beginning part, we see there's this enemy incursion. We see in verses 4 through 10, Saul's readiness to meet this. Verse 11 is victory on the ground. Verses 12 through 13 is Saul's tenderness or Saul's grace. And verses 14 to 15, we have this public confirmation that includes the people and Samuel and Saul and worship. So I'm just going to go through some of these. I'm going to draw out some things I think are important, and then we're going to see what to do about it. In verses 1 through 3, the Ammonites show how wicked the enemies of God really are. The city that they attack is on the outskirts. It'd be kind of like maybe the slower gazelle. They're more vulnerable tactically. But when the Ammonites come in, they don't just want to destroy the city. They're going to do that, is what they feel is a foregone conclusion. But they have a reputation. This is 1069 BC, and the Ammonites have a reputation for gouging out right eyes. And that sounds ridiculous to us. We don't live in a militaristic, agrarian society. But here, the Ammonites, they want to defeat the people and gouge out eyes, which would make daily life harder. It's going to mark you out as somebody who's been subjugated to those that have defeated you. And for generations, you're going to be in a weakened or lesser state. One of the commentaries I read said gouging out the right eye would have made your military a lot weaker, because your archers aren't going to be able to be involved in the fight. And fighting with two eyes is hard enough. Fighting with one eye would be even harder. So they're looking for long-term defeat, and they're looking for long-term humiliation. Now, without going too far into this, we could say that even negotiating like the people of Jabesh Gilead did, with the enemies of God, is never going to get you what you want, and you're always going to lose more than you even knew was on the table. And I think the same is true with the fundamentals of the Christian faith. Back in the 1920s, the Sandine thesis, the idea was, and this is where kind of words got changed, a fundamentalist was a conservative, and conservatives were radicals. Therefore, fundamentalists became radicals. You see how simple that narrative is? But the world's not that simple. And people gripped onto this simplistic narrative, and it still is seen in, I'll say, our society and culture today. Fundamentalists are not necessarily radicals unless, and this is the worldly perspective, having fundamentals at all is a radical idea. And the world wants to be pluralistic in an extreme manner, and their fundamental is acceptance of everything, which isn't tenable. Enough with the philosophy. Fundamentals of the faith are necessary and right. G.K. Chesterton, who is a Catholic apologist, was asked, because he kept on talking about fundamentals of the faith and fundamentals of the faith, and they said, G.K., you're so tight on these fundamentals, why won't you just give an inch to the right or an inch to the left? And he said, when you're balancing on a tightrope, an inch to the right or an inch to the left is everything. So the fundamentals of the faith are not something to be negotiated. And that takes understanding the fundamentals, understanding the theology as best we can, understanding the pastoral implications, as we are all pastoral whenever we're counseling our friends and our family, to understand that we can say what the fundamentals of the faith are, but how they play out in someone's circumstances takes wisdom and experience and nuance and patience and listening. And those are things that can be talked, and those can be gently said, but the fundamentals do not change. So without going too much further just about the negotiation between the elders of Jabesh-Gilead and the Ammonites, negotiation within the boundaries of the Christian faith is not commensurate with our fundamentals. Now the enemies of God were making this incursion into Israel, and Saul, from the previous chapter, he's the de facto leader. He's the guy. And when the word gets all the way down to him, we see that he's ready. Again, coming to the text, I have this idea that Saul is a bad guy. And we're about to see how Saul starts to make the right decisions again and again and again and again. What do we do with this? We read in verse 6. This is the kicker. Verse 6, and the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words. The Spirit of God was working within Saul. The Spirit of God was working within Saul. And so we know by God's decretive will, what God said is going to happen, that this is how he's going to play out his redemptive story right then. Saul's not a good guy, but God can work through bad guys. And here is a great example. We see he does this thing with cutting up oxen. Well, before we get there, what does Saul do right? He hears and he responds correctly. He takes action. He takes action. What's the action he takes? He cuts up these oxen and he sends it to the far reaches. Now, this idea of cutting up animals, as unpleasant as it sounds, this is the old suzerain vassal way of making a treaty. This is how to make a covenant. The old word, the Hebrew word for to make a covenant isn't to make one, it's to cut one. So there is blood involved in the covenant. Now, certainly we can speak to how that is about Christ ultimately. But in the Old Testament, they made this deal where the people with more power and people with less power made an agreement, and there are terms. And they used to cut an animal apart, lay it on the ground, and both parties would walk through it. And by doing that, they're signifying, I'm going to agree to uphold my end of the bargain, or may the same thing happen to me, death. That's how they made a covenant. There was death and blood involved. Saul does something. What he does by making this action with covenantal implications and symbolism, he's acting boldly, he's acting like a king. Saul's doing the right thing. For most of the rest of Scripture, we can't say that confidently. But he's acting boldly, he's acting in a kingly way. In verse 11, they make it quite a distance from Gibeah of Saul, which is just a little bit above Jerusalem. They go way up and around. They go over the Jordan to the east side of the Jordan. Bezek is on the west side of the Jordan. They muster all these men here, and it's in a single verse, in verse 11, where they show that they have defeated the enemy. Now, this is where you get to enjoy a little bit of my military tactics education. It says that they defeated them. They attacked them on the first watch, which is tactically a great move. You get them whenever they're sleeping. And then you continue to defeat. And then in some translations, it says that they went after them until not even two were together. Other translations call this a rout, where they're routing them. They've already been defeated. The Ammonites have been defeated, but the army of Israel continues to go after them until not two of them are together. Routing is whenever you continue to attack even when the enemy is on the run. It's where defeat isn't enough. You want annihilation. Now that can sound very, very tough. And again, this is a militaristic, agrarian society, but it was the right thing to do. These were the enemies of God. The enemies of God will not stand in any number, in any type, in any way, whenever God's justice is being exercised. So not leaving even two people together is a complete destruction. It is this annihilation of their military effort. Earlier, when the Ammonites were trying to make, or whenever they were parlaying the terms of this deal, the Ammonites didn't want to just defeat Jabesh-Gilead, they wanted to humiliate them. Understand that God has now turned the tables entirely to where the Ammonites, who thought they were going to win and humiliate the people of God, now the Ammonites have been defeated, destroyed, and they themselves have been humiliated. It's a complete reversal of the expectations. In verses 12 through 13, we see Saul's tenderness. At the end of the last chapter, it says, my translation has, but some worthless fellows said, how can this man, how can Saul save us? Now, ultimately, they're right, but not in the short term, because Saul is saving them here in this chapter. And they despised him and brought him no present, but he held his peace. With all of his shortcomings, Saul has withheld his temporal judgment on these people, and he's not going to do anything about it. And now the people that were supporting Saul see Saul's victory, and they said, those scoffers that said, who thinks Saul can do it, and doubted me, bring them forward, we're going to kill them. And Saul, after his action, his kingly work with the covenantal symbolism, with his defeat of the Ammonites, he is now, after this great battle, showing incredible restraint and tenderness and grace by saying, no, we're not going to kill anybody. In fact, it's the Lord himself that has done this through me, and now we're going to go to Gilgal and we're going to worship. So understand his tenderness. I think what's very important about that portion is Saul has recognized the source of this grace. Saul's recognized the source of the power. Saul's recognized, ultimately, this is about God. So he's making all the right choices. And then finally, as I mentioned, he brings everyone together in worship. I wanted to reiterate what Carson and I talked about, this idea that Saul starts out politically, militarily, financially, socially. He's got all the power, and he's making all the right moves. Saul's doing the right thing. I think what God may be trying to signal there is kingship is how we're going to do this. But as we see Saul's kingship go forward, God is clearly showing us Saul's kingship is not how we're going to do this. And ultimately, you can't be saved by an earthly king, and so this earthly kingship is not going to do this. Saul starts out wonderfully. Everything that we expected, everything that we wanted. And he ends up at the end of his life humiliated and depleted, divided. Saul is a disgrace. We are remembered for how we finish. David, on the other hand, starts out in great humility. David starts out the youngest, the smallest, the least expected. And God uses him and his humility. And at the end of David's kingship, David is exalted. In that way, David's the better king. And in that way, this same trajectory and arc, David is a type of Christ, meaning that that trajectory is the type of trajectory that the ultimate king is going to have. Jesus was born of a woman, born under the law, born into humanity. He was born into a poor family. He started out wildly humble. And at the end of his earthly ministry, Jesus said, all authority in heaven has been given to me. He starts out humiliated, and Christ concludes and is still living exalted. Humiliation to exaltation. Saul was a king, and kingship was how God was going to work out his plan of redemption ultimately. But in the beginning, we have this story to show that this guy is not how he's going to get it done. Christ is how he's going to get it done. Saul was a far leap from that. So we need to talk about, what does this mean? I think that it's very important to recognize and to apply to our own lives that we can't count ourselves good for the good works that we've done. I think that that's almost a very clear, and we might be past that in our minds. But this difference between good works and faith is an important concept. We are expected to do good works when we are in Christ, and that's because good works don't get us into heaven. Good works are filthy rags before God. But when we are in Christ, God's given us his grace and we have faith. We have this wellspring of goodness in us. We have Christ in us, the living water. And here, these good works that are going to be a natural response to the love that God has given us in the gift of Christ, that we shouldn't help but be able to respond to God's love with good works. So we can't recognize our own good works and rest on our laurels. That's not how the Christian life works. So we can't count ourselves, nor anybody else, as good or sufficient on behalf of our works. Number two, and probably more importantly, we should acknowledge the good works of others, believers and unbelievers alike. I think in a really acrid, not harmonious Western civilization, it's very easy to have those simple narratives in our mind. This is good, that is bad. If someone's bad, they can do no good. If someone's good, they can do no bad. Those narratives, those ideas do not work. So something we can do as living out a Christian principle of charity and assuming the best about other people, we can acknowledge and engage believers and non-believers alike by talking about the good works that they are doing. If there's ever a bad person you've ever met in your life, and they have seemingly, maybe you thought by mistake done something right, something that's good or true or beautiful, we can talk to them about that. There's even an entrance into evangelism for that. There's a doctrine called the unity of the transcendentals. Something that's true, something that's good, something that's beautiful. If something's true or good or beautiful, it's ultimately because God is objectively true and good and beautiful. And those things that a person does are mirroring the goodness and the trueness and the beauty which is in God. Unbelievers can still perform good works by God's common grace. And it's because the Spirit of God is working in them. How could it not be? So if you see someone who is a believer, you can encourage them by engaging them and acknowledging their good works. That would be a great encouragement to them. But if there's an unbeliever and they're doing something good or true or beautiful, you should recognize that the Spirit of God is working in them. And if he's working in them in a common grace way, it is possible that they are a future brother and sister of the faith. So if there's an unregenerate, unbelieving, bad person, and they have what you think is accidentally got something right, the Spirit of God's working in them. And you can then talk to them about why they did that, what they think that means, why good is good, why true is true. There's an entrance to talk about the gospel there. And finally, I think that it would be an important recognition, like Saul, that when we acknowledge the source of this grace that gives us either faith or by common grace allows us to do good works, acknowledging the source of that grace will lead us to worship, just like Saul. So we need to strip away our own good works and understand that the source of that is faith, and the source of faith is grace. We don't rest on our good works. 2, we can acknowledge and appreciate the good works of all people in a principle of charity. And finally, when we rightly recognize the source of that grace and those good works, it should drive us to worship. Pray with me. Father God, we thank you for your word, for these 15 verses that have so very much for us, this and more. Lord, we ask you would impress these things on our hearts, that we can be charitable to our neighbor, that we can recognize things that are true and good and beautiful, that we not rest on it, Lord, but we rest only on you, the source of grace. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.